Welcome to this episode of Faith in Community. I'm Kate Seitz Bortner, your host for this show. And today we have some very special guests from the York Friends Meeting, Lamar Matthew and Colleen Shields. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah. We've been talking before the show about all of the things that we could share with our viewers. So we'll just start, let's start right at your meeting house. Tell us where you are, the location, and tell us a little bit about how the Quakers came to York. Let's start there.
Okay. We are at 135 West Philadelphia Street. We've been there since 1766. We're the oldest house of worship in continual use in the city of York. There are older congregations in York, but we've maintained our building since 1766. The eastern portion of the building is the original portion, and in 1783 we built a new addition onto the western portion of the meeting house, and we call that the new room. We were formed out of the meetings of the county. There is Warrington meeting to the north of us in Warrington Township, by close to Pinchot Park, and we were under the care of that meeting for many years, and became our own, as we call it, a monthly meeting. And we call it monthly meeting because of the business meeting that we hold once a month. However, we worship every week on what we call First Day. And when Quakers came into existence in 1652, they realized that all the days of the weeks and the months were paying homage to things that they weren't in unity with, like Greek gods and Roman gods. So they named the days. One was Sunday, two was Monday, and so forth. And the months were also numbered also. And so we hold our worship on first days. And we have another Bible study that we do on third day, which is Tuesday night. And Quakers came into Pennsylvania through Philadelphia, William Penn's colony, and they moved west, and finally were able to cross the Susquehanna in 1735 and settled in the Newberry Tract, which is the northern part of York County. From there, they branched out. The original stakeholders in the county were Quakers. Business was, the government was run by Quakers at that time. The first sheriff of York County was a Quaker by the name of Blunsdon. There's a lane off of old Route 30, 462, that's Blunsdon Lane. That's where his home was. Wrightsville was a Quaker settlement. John Wright was a Quaker, and his sister Rebecca was a frontier doctor at that time. The Quakers came across the river. We have always had, talking about Rebecca, she was an educated woman, which Quakers believed in the equality of women and equality of everyone, and so they educated everyone, which was not common in those days.
You're really embedded in the formation of our community in this area. I had not realized that the earliest settlers came into Newberry Township north of us.
Right.
So Warrington meeting is older than you.
Correct.
Wow.
Warrington, actually the Manchester meeting, what was called then Manchester meeting, was the oldest meeting. It eventually became Newberry meeting, and then it became Redlands meeting, which the Redland Meeting House still stands, and they hold meeting for worship in the summer. In the warm months, there's no central heat or electric or water in that building.
Now you've modernized your meeting a bit. I've been in it, and I recall there is running water.
Oh yes, we have. We're up to date with facilities. We have a small kitchen. We have restroom. and we're bursting at the seams. We need to grow. And with a historic building, we have to be very careful about how we see the future of that site and the buildings on it. Quakers were very involved with the early settlement of this county. In fact, the Quakers came here in 1735 before the treaty was ratified with the native people. And it was because Governor Keith, who was the governor, a Quaker governor at that time, thought there was copper in the northern part of the county and wanted to have the rights to that. So that's why he settled people on it. And they started building meeting houses every 10 miles. And the 10-mile was anyone in between that could easily drive to or ride to meeting. And Quakers at that time rode horses. Even the women rode horses. They thought carriages were pretentious, and so they set 5 miles as what could be ridden to meeting in a first day morning. There's a road in northern part of the county called Quaker Race, and the legend goes that that's where the young Quaker men raced their horses back and forth from meeting, from farm to meeting.
Some fun, a little release for their energy.
Now, the 10-mile meeting houses played a part in the Underground Railroad. Over in Manalapan, which is in Adams County, another meeting house, which is north of Biglerville. And so 10 miles is what could be traveled in a night between meeting houses from one Quaker settlement to another Quaker settlement, taking fugitives, slaves during the Underground Railroad period, and they were quite active. Newberry and Lewisberry were hotbeds of abolitionist activity. And as York was also, we don't believe anyone was ever secreted away in the York Meeting House. It was too open a place, and this had a lot of Southern sympathizers in York, and they were always watching.
Just a little too close to the Mason-Dixon
yes.
line.
And the Quakers that came into York County were Irish. People think of Quakers as English, but these were people who came off of the lands in Ireland and resettled into our area. None of them were ethnic Irish. They were Irish by where they were born. There were only a very few of the Irish surnames that came with us. Most of them were Scottish or Welsh or English who settled on the Irish lands and then came over here after generations there.
Now, looking at the early days of York's development, you could probably drop some names, just play the name game for our viewers with some of the well-known or names that we would recognize who were part of the early Quaker builders and shakers in the community.
Okay, well, and shaker, you said
I
that
know.
word.
I'm mixing communities here.
We're called,
Inadvertently.
the right name of our faith is the Religious Society of Friends. We're called Quakers because in a court case early in the 1600s, it was said that the judge said we should shake or quake at the sound of the Lord's name. And we did quake in those days. Shakers developed, there was Mother Ann Lee, who was a Quaker in England. And she was a little bit different than most Quakers. She believed in singing and dancing, and that was all part of her worship. And she had a following, and she left Quakers. She was disowned by the Quakers and set up her own colony and her own faith here. But people confuse us with the Shakers. They confuse us with the Amish and Mennonite. We do not drive wagons and horses anymore. We don't wear flat hats or bonnets anymore, although there are some groups. There are many various groups of Quakers. Some to the west of us in Ohio still dress plain, and few of us use the old language. with the thee and the thou, which was quite common in those days. There are a few of the old folks who still do thee and thou thee. So some of the early friends or friends of last century, this century and last century, that would be common here, heard of, would be probably the most common would be Arthur Briggs Farquhar. His family came out of Pipe Creek, Maryland, and came to York, then went to Sandy Spring in Maryland, and then came back to York, where Arthur Briggs Farquhar, or A.B. as he was called, was the premier industrialist of the 19th and early 20th century. Farquhar Park, which most people know, was donated by A.B. Farquhar and planted by him. Then the city bought property around that property to increase the size of the park. He was an industrialist. Before him was John Elgar, who was his uncle. Now, another unusual thing about Quakers is that at that time we were not allowed to marry outside of our sect. And so everybody in the early days of Quakers were related. And it's very easy if you're doing genealogy. If you find one Quaker in the background, you'll find the rest of the family quickly. John Elgar was a manufacturer. He created the first ironclad steamboat and launched it at Wrightsville, and it plied the Susquehanna for many years. In his shop, which was run by, later run by Phineas Davis and Gardner, and I can't recall his first name, but Phineas Davis created the first economic horizontal coal-burning coal-burning locomotive, and he built it in the late 1820s in a shop on South Newberry Street, and there was no railroad here at the time. So he dismantled it, took it by ox cart to Baltimore, set it up on the B&O Railroad, which was a Quaker railroad, and ran from Baltimore to Ellicott City and won a prize of nearly $4,000, which was quite large in those days. He eventually was killed on the railroad in Baltimore, and people think he's buried at our meeting house, but he's not. He's buried at the Asquith Meeting House in Baltimore.
I didn't know that about Phineas Davis. Those are iconic names in the early formation of our community. Well, Colleen, as a community, you have quite a responsibility to steward not just the history, but the property. You've been on that particular piece of land for almost 250 years with a building, and it's not a vast estate, but in what ways do you, as a community now, kind of guard what's been given to you as a legacy and reach out to the community today in York?
Well, maintaining the building has been a challenge from time to time. You know, we have a brick building, so of course we need to maintain that, and we had to repair the roof a few years ago. But maintaining the grounds behind the meeting house has also been a challenge. At times there were only a few attenders, so keeping up with weeding and stuff in the backyard, it became overgrown. And around 2003 there was a major problem with loitering and littering in the backyard. So it took a lot of discernment to come up with a plan of how to address this issue. And I wasn't part of the Quaker community at that time, but I understand it was very, contentious. Just kick him out, or, well, let's find a more peaceful approach. Call the cops? That was probably one of the ideas.
I think it's ironic that, and I worked for the police department at that time, so I was well aware of that. But I think it's ironic that the first sheriff of York County was a Quaker.
Right.
So then one day somebody said, well, let's just go back in the yard and start cleaning up the trash and pulling weeds. And as they met to do that once a week, they started to interact with those who were loitering in the backyard. And gradually, over the course of that season, fewer and fewer people were loitering in the backyard. And then we discovered all these wonderful plants that were hiding between the weeds and all the other overgrowth. So it became a project, and we still have a garden committee. The following year, they decided to focus on native plants, sticking with our historical tradition, looking at the plants that were native to Pennsylvania, you know. And they got a grant they got some advice from Mayscapes, and a grant from a Beautify York grant to help purchase some of these native plants. And now it is just a wonderful space in the backyard that visitors are free to stop in and look at the flowers, walk through the gardens, sit and meditate, watch the birds, watch the bees. Just this summer we got 2 beehives added to our garden. And we had 5 adults initially willing to take on the project. And then one of those was a mom, and she wanted her 2 kids to get away from electronics. So they took the beekeeping class, and they're now excited about the bees also.
What a wonderful way to go from having a problem with your property to having a resource and an asset in the neighborhood.
Yeah. An additional part of that resource is the community garden plots that we added about 3 years ago. We now have 7 community garden plots.
What does that mean?
That means, I think their size is like 4 feet by 8 feet, that people from the community who have small backyards or live in apartments, don't have a place to grow their own produce, can rent the space. I think it's like a $10 rental fee for the whole season, very cheap and affordable. And they can come there and plant their own fruits and vegetables, herbs. I think the Old Town what's the name of that? Old Town, East York 4-H Club has been using 2 of those plots each year. So that introduces the children of the city to gardening and to growing their own food, hopefully healthy eating.
That is a movement that I'm really happy to see in the area. And so many of the city churches, and we've got a ton of them, are beginning to lead the way and anchor communities in this gardening back to growing our own food, native plant, and now I understand urban beehive kind of projects. I'm aware that there may be viewers watching who are in the city and have very small pieces of ground and don't really understand or know about the Native Plant Project. One of the things that we're getting more and more aware of is the threat to butterfly populations and bee populations with our monoculture. Nothing but corn and soybeans as far as the eye can see, and pesticides actually doing away with even wildlife. I can't tell you the last time I saw a pheasant. So you're saying that someone who's interested in how to start a native plant yard or learn a little more about bees and what they can do in your yard could come to you.
Well, not me personally. I don't have the training in that. But there are a variety of people in our meeting who have the knowledge of that.
So how would someone contact the Friends meeting with that question?
Well, you can show up Thursday mornings when we call them the garden ladies, the Quaker ladies in the garden, are working, and they do that every Thursday morning from about 9 o'clock to when it gets too warm.
So that's 5th day.
5th day.
Show up on 5th day in the morning to help in the garden, and then get some advice and could even volunteer to help out.
And,
yes.
And might I say, a little history of what that looks like a yard is actually a burial ground.
Really?
There are 244 unmarked graves there.
Oh my.
Quakers believed that it was pretentious to mark your grave. You needed to be known by the good deeds that you left behind, instead of the monument over your dust. And where the gardens are is where the old horse sheds had been when the Quakers used horses. So they're not over top of graves, they're over the drive where the horse shed
So how
had
big
been.
is your lot?
It's actually 4 lots. There were 2 lots, one lot original, second lot when they added the 1783 addition, and then 2 lots were added in the back as the burial ground was filled. They added 2 more lots off of Park Avenue or Park Street or Park Lane, I guess it is Park Lane. So there are burials there. No one has been buried there since the late 1800s.
Do you have records of who's buried there?
Yes, that's an interesting story. When during the early 1800s, there were floods that happened in York, and our book of, we keep extensive records of everything. Everything is written down and minuted. And there was a book that was started in 1766 of all the burials and the births. And that, in one of the floods, went down the creek, and it was retrieved and dried out, and next flood it went down the creek and no one found it. And so everyone got together, and as I said, people were all related, so they knew who was buried there, and they made a list of everyone that was buried in the burial ground. They didn't know exactly where.
They reconstructed
They reconstructed it, and then later on, one of the Jessops, and that's another very common name that people would be familiar with, Apple Hill. Apple Hill was Jessop's farm.
Jessup Place.
And Jessup Place. And Apple Hill was named that because Jonathan Jessop was a horticulturalist and developed the Jessop's Fine Keeper, which is now called the York Imperial Apple, and that was there's a monument at the Apple Hill that states about his producing that apple, which eventually, when Quakers gather, they come from all over, and we have regional gatherings, and friends in the Shannon, and we call Quakers Quakers, and we call ourselves Friends also. So sometimes there's that difference that say, well, who are you? And we're Friends and we're Quakers. So Friends out of the Shenandoah Valley would pick up saplings from Jonathan Jessop and carry them down the Shenandoah Valley, and started that apple culture down near Winchester. Yeah.
The Apple Blossom Festival.
Yes.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that at all. So the York Imperial Apple is one of your gifts to this area. We'll have to look for that. I'll be darned. So I know that the Friends have a list of principles that ground your faith and your practice. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what those are.
A little bit about our faith. We have no ministers. We say that we have laid down the laity and created everyone as a minister, brought everyone up as a minister. We have no doctrine or dogma. We have a set of tenets that we live by, and they are simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and stewardship. And easy to understand those. It spells spice if you go down the letters. Simplicity is simplicity in everything. Simplicity in dress, which was part of our culture, which made us look different at one time. We found out that was folly. It cost too much to dress differently.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Now, people look at me and say, why do you dress like that? And it's not that I'm trying to look different. It's that I know where these clothes were made, and it opens up a way to converse about sweatshops where clothing are made. Mm-hmm. These clothing are made by Amish in Middlebury, Indiana. So I know where they were made. I feel comfortable wearing them. And I can also, it opens up that way to speak about the evils of production in sweatshops. Mm-hmm. Our peace testimony, which we hold from 1650. I can't remember the date. Gosh. We came before King Charles II, and at that time we were a struggling group, and most of the dissenters at that time were seen as threats. So a peace testimony was developed that said we are a peaceful people and do not use weapons, carnal weapons. The weapons we use will be of words and spirit. Integrity, what we do has to match our faith. And so it is, if we're investing in something, we need to know that what we're investing in does not go to war or vices, that it's all in a peaceful, friendly manner. Community, we're into the community among ourselves, but also community beyond the walls of our meeting house, working with the local communities, the international communities. We were given the Nobel, or awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1947 for our work in reconstruction of Germany after World War II, where we brought a lot of people together in community there, feeding them. And I was talking to one woman who was German and living at that time and in Germany as a child, and she said, friends, they brought food, but they also brought books. And we were into education also, and giving everybody a way to develop.
And if I could interject there, sure. Our love of books is something that we still focus on today. We have something called a Little Free Library outside of our meeting house. And it's only about 18 inches square, made out of recycled materials, that as part of our stewardship of the earth. And also the stewardship of recycling books. You can borrow a book, you can donate a book. And the idea is to improve the love of reading for everyone in the community.
You say this is outside the meeting house?
Yes.
So I could bring some of my used books?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
So it's open 24/7.
That's wonderful.
For visitors walking on the sidewalk.
The Little Free Library, I didn't know that. What a nice resource right there.
Yeah, we just started that last year in 2013. And the idea started in like 2009 in Wisconsin, and it's now a worldwide movement. Yeah. You know,
we were talking earlier about the Society of Friends is really small in terms of numbers internationally, but the impact, the footprint that you have made in the world and around the country then and now is way outside the size of the boot, actually, that you wear. So talk a little bit more about the way that you impact education in the community. I had forgotten about the equality of women and the education of women in work, and that's part of what makes America, our culture, I think, what it is and the way that it developed that kind of influence. So say a little more about that, Colleen.
Well, for several years, I think it was part of the Beautify York grant that we had, there was an educational component. So our garden ladies became the science ladies and went into a local elementary school and did science classes for the school district. Unfortunately, the guidelines of the school district have changed. The focus on passing the test scores and everything these days, we're no longer allowed to go in and continue that project. But it is our love, and we're so grateful that children are attending on first day mornings, and we welcome children to come. Children are also part of our equality. So during our meeting for worship, which is basically a silent worship, and then if someone feels led to present a message, that can be someone 4 years old or someone 64 years old. Age makes no difference.
What a powerful experience for a child to be in a room full of people of all ages and experience that they have the opportunity to have a voice and be listened to. I noticed that you brought your Tibetan chimes. Explain a
Yes.
little bit how that works.
For children these days, there's so many noises and distractions. So in trying to teach our children about silence, we pass these around the circle. Each child gets a chance to ring them and then listen till the sound disappears. Now, of course, these are a lot closer to me, so I can hear them a lot longer than the speakers are probably going to pick them up. But teaching children about faith is of an important part of any religion. And we like to introduce them to concepts. We've heard some feedback from the children that our lessons are easy to understand. They love to come and make new friends. Of course, there is one dislike. Our first day school meets in the room where all the food is laid out for our common meal. Oh. And it's hard not to want to go nibble during first day school.
So they're learning silence and patience.
Yes, yes.
And the silence is important because our meetings for worship are silent. And we call it, we sit in expectant waiting, and which is unusual. Since we have no one at the head of the meeting speaking, or we don't have singing during the meeting, it's something that children need to get into with this, need to learn in this very noisy and busy society we live in now. We do sing, though. We do have a hymnal that is Quaker, that was put together many years ago. In fact, it's been updated many times. And we do sing. And one of the community pieces that we have is opening the meeting house to the Sacred Harp community. Now that's HARP, H-A-R-P. And that community gathers from all over. The last Sacred Harp Sing we had people from 9 different states and 2 countries. Sacred Harp is done a cappella in 4 parts, and we sing from an old hymnal that was first published in 1843. And it's in 4 parts, and it really rocks the meeting house.
I would love to hear that.
It vibrates. You can hear it up at the market house.
Wow.
So it's really loud. It's full throat, and
Oh my.
it was a type of singing that was done before churches had instruments, and it was preserved primarily through the. It started in New England, went down the Appalachians into the South, and preserved primarily by the Primitive Baptists, who still sing 4-part shape notes.
That was my question. Is that related to shape note singing?
Shape note singing. The shapes are a square for La, a triangle for Fa, a circle for So, and a diamond for Mi. And we sing the shapes, the sound of the shape, like Fa, So, La, Mi. And we sing those through as the song is written, as it's on the staff, and then we sing the words. So it's sort of like practicing first and then singing the words.
Is that full throat singing related in any way at all to the Welsh choirs, that very strong tradition of big sound?
They are a little bit more refined, I would say. If you're at all familiar with Glen Rock and its carolers, they sing a type of shape note or type of sacred harp, which we call West Gallery. And it was called West Gallery because in the old days, when they after the churches brought music back in England, the choir lofts were in the west of the church. And so, and it was raised into a gallery. And that's also where the term stand and face the music comes from. When they would sing, they would stand and face the West Gallery.
Fascinating.
So, and there are people from England who come over to sing. They've been here at Glen Rock, and they also sang with us at different venues that Shape Note singers sing.
That's fascinating. I'm aware that we've covered a lot of what we wanted to talk about, and we probably should be wrapping up. But tell me when this the Sacred Harp musical event occurs, because that is open to the public, right?
Yes, it's open to the public. It is the last Saturday of April every year. This will be the 8th year that we've sung there. And all are welcome. You don't need to be able to read it. You just sing loud, sit next to somebody that's singing loud.
That's great.
What we say is, if you can hear the person next to you, you're not singing loud enough.
Oh my goodness. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun.
It is.
And I would imagine that the children would enjoy that too.
Yes, there are children who come, and we lead in the center of the square, in the hollow square, and children will lead tunes. They'll be called to lead.
Oh my.
So I was just at a sing where a 4-year-old was leading.
Oh.
Yeah.
My, what a nice experience for children to learn to take their place in community in a gentle way. You mentioned something about New Year's.
Yes,
What's
New
that,
Year's
Colleen?
Eve. Downtown York used to have a big gathering right in the downtown. Now it's kind of moved out to the stadium. But in 2001, we started providing special music on New Year's Eve. It started out with a guitarist and a harpist, and after a few years, then 2 members of our meeting, Ed and Fran Norton, took over the tradition. And they have produced some CDs, Flute and Friends. They do classical music interspersed with some humor. Ed loves to tell jokes and funny stories. And usually they do about 3 concerts during the course of the evening, ending before midnight, so that you still have time to go to the stadium for the fireworks and stuff at midnight. But that is also an event open to everybody. But we're not just open on those 2 times for music events. You know, you're welcome to use the grounds at any time during the week to check out our flowers, and you're willing to stop by to participate in one of our worship services.
I'm also aware that you do a lot of other outreach and social justice, current issue events that I read about over the course of a year. So people should keep their eye out if they are interested in the Friends Meeting of York. You've got a website too, don't you?
Yes, we do have a website. It was just recently updated, so we would love to have visitors.
Okay, very good. So we'll be putting your address, your contact information, the website along the bottom of the screen so people can know how to contact you. And wish you luck with everything that you're doing in the community. Thank you so much for sharing this fascinating overview of what you've got. I imagine we could probably do a couple of episodes dipping into some deeper history and maybe even visit your yard with some pictures and a field trip sometime.
Yes.
So thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
And
Kate.
thank you to you viewers for tuning in to Faith and Community and learning today about the York Society of Friends and all that they do to help keep our York community strong. Until next time, this is Kate Seitz-Bortner saying bye for now.